All right. So the live video is on YouTube. And it's delayed by 15 seconds. That's how it works.
Perfect.
The live video is on YouTube. I need to stop the sound. Okay, let's give people just 1 minute and then we'll get started.
Good.
We have 18 people here, so I'm going to mute everyone, and I would ask George to unmute himself. Can you unmute yourself?
Yep, I'm good.
All right, great. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Athens Bitcoin meetup. This meetup started in its current format in 2015. Has been going on for 6 years. If you're in Athens, we recommend that you join the meetup. Here's the link on screen, so you can be informed of future meetups. Today we have George Kaloudis with us. George studied mathematics and worked in investment banking for 5 years before he joined Coindesk Research. So Coindesk is the most well-known media in the area of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And George recently published a report on Bitcoin energy consumption. So we invited him to talk about this and answer your questions. So we'll let George speak for about 20 or 25 minutes, and then we'll open it up to everyone to ask questions, either here on the Zoom call or on the chat, or perhaps on the YouTube chat. George, welcome.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. Specifically Dimitri for reaching out to me on Twitter after presumably having read my report. I'm going to set up a slideshow right now before I start speaking, so give me 1 second. And should be. Okay, so can everyone see what's going on here? You guys see the first page, does Bitcoin have an energy problem?
Are you sharing your screen?
I am trying to. 1 second.
Yes.
Okay, so now we are good and I can see this. And so like Dimitri said, guys, hi, thank you for having me. Before we get started, I need to lay out a disclaimer for the sake of both my job and for my employer. This presentation is not an investment advice. It's not an inducement to buy or sell a particular financial instrument or any cryptocurrency. And all opinions that I will invariably express during this presentation are my own and not Coindesk's. So Dimitri gave a small little introduction of me, but I want to do a quick introduction in Greek to show you guys how grateful I am to have been invited to speak with you. Like I said, thank you, Dimitri, for the opportunity. And I apologize for the native Greek speakers at some of my pronunciation of some of these words. So, Kalispera, το όνομά μου είναι George Kaloudis. Εργάζομαι στην Coindesk, όπου κάνω έρευνα για το Bitcoin. Ξεκίνησα στην Coindesk το Μάρτιο αυτής της χρόνιας. Πριν από την Coindesk, δούλευα για 5 χρόνια σε investment banking. Επίσης, έπαιξα ποδόσφαιρο για το Davidson College στην Βόρεια Καρολίνα, όπου σπούδασα μαθηματικά. Είμαι Έλληνο-Αμερικανός, η μαμά μου είναι από ένα χωριό στην Αιτωλοκεντρονία και ο μπαμπάς μου είναι χιώτης, αλλά μεγάλωσε στην Αθήνα στο Καμετέρο. Είμαι εδώ για να μιλήσω για το Bitcoin and energy consumption, κατανάλωση ενεργείας, if you will. So for that, thank you guys. I wanted to try that out for my first time speaking Greek to a lot of native speakers, but sort of transferred back over to a language I'm far more comfortable in. Hi guys, I'm George. I currently do Bitcoin research for Coindesk. I spent 5 years in investment banking across multiple disciplines, and I went to Davidson College and studied math. I played soccer there as well. I got interested in Bitcoin thanks to my dad, who was actually one of the original Bitcoin miners. He was a miner in the CPU era, but I really didn't pay much attention to it until Dimitri and I were talking about this earlier, but in 2015, during the bank runs in Greece, my Theo was there, and him talking about how people were lining up at the bank to get to their money. That really made it click for me. Although I didn't immediately go into working in the space, I'm very excited to have moved just this year in March to Coindesk to write about Bitcoin. And my very first report I wrote was about Bitcoin and energy consumption. And it's probably at the tip of the tongue of a lot of media critiques. So let's dive in a little bit here. The title of my report is, Does Bitcoin Have an Energy Problem? And I submit that it does not. So let's dive into it. So I know I'm speaking to a somewhat educated audience when it comes to what Bitcoin is. So I'm not going to talk about the ins and outs of all the small things that make up Bitcoin. But I'm sure most of you have seen media outlets decrying Bitcoin as an environmental disaster. If you just Google Bitcoin and energy, you get this whole litany of headlines that I've put on the screen here about how Bitcoin does have an energy problem. But there is a sprinkle of truth across most of these sensationalist headlines. Bitcoin does in fact use a lot of energy. It's really easy, in fact, to attack Bitcoin because of how simple and transparent the system is. For the most part, the entirety of Bitcoin's energy footprint is contained by the energy consumption that is associated with what's known as Bitcoin mining. Again, I'm not going to dive into the ins and outs of what Bitcoin mining is. There are probably people on this call that understand Bitcoin mining better than I do. But all that to say, and we can get to that later, is this is literally by design. Bitcoin is supposed to use a lot of energy. I'm going to expand on that a little bit before we dive directly into the critics' claims that Bitcoin does have an energy problem, which, as I've already said, I argue it certainly does not. So I bet most of you guys know why Bitcoin uses a bunch of energy, but I want to take the why a little bit further and touch on why it needs to use a bunch of energy. I'm sure you guys heard this word, proof of work, but Bitcoin uses what is known as proof of work for its consensus mechanism to maintain trust and integrity in the Bitcoin network without needing a third party to maintain that trust. So I go into much further detail in my report, so I urge you guys to read it if you want to learn more. But the short of it is that Bitcoin is secured by energy consumption and computing power. In Bitcoin, the chain that is the single source of truth is the longest chain, and that longest chain is a chain with the most blocks. And since blocks are created with energy expenditure, it typically follows that the longest chain is a chain with the most work expended. And that work is expended by Bitcoin miners, and they are rewarded for their work with block rewards. A lot of people think that Bitcoin is solving these difficult math problems, but that's just not true at all. Winning a block is completely random. And the reason it is difficult for blocks, the reason that it is difficult is blocks can only be solved through brute force. If it wasn't random, then there could be potential for people to think of new and innovative ways to solve the problem. If it's random, then it's just going to take more work to solve the problem. So if you were to hack Bitcoin, the only way to do it is to spend a lot of money on more electricity than everyone else in the network. So it necessarily follows that Bitcoin needs to be energy intensive. And I know a lot of you, or some of you at least, I've heard about different consensus algorithms that have been proposed, most notably proof of stake. Ethereum 2.0 is going to move from proof of work to proof of stake. But I think it's really important to think that, there has never been a commercially successful way to implement proof of stake to guarantee security. And I urge you to also think about the fact that just because we're replacing work with capital, it doesn't mean that that is in any way more or less efficient. There's still capital that needs to be staked in order for security to be guaranteed. So I submit to you that, yes, Bitcoin does need to use energy. We can discuss that at a later point if you guys have something against that. So many of you have probably seen this chart like this at some point while Googling things about Bitcoin. First time I saw it was in the BBC. And what they do is they rank Bitcoin as a country by its annual electricity consumption, and they find it someplace in the top 30, and that automatically makes Bitcoin a problem. And now clearly I'm a Bitcoiner. A lot of you on the call are Bitcoiners as well. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here. So we are certainly biased, but I certainly think it's unfair to just put Bitcoin in and lock it in as a country. The bar that makes up Bitcoin, it's right between Egypt and Malaysia on this chart. It actually makes up some part of each of the other countries. There's a piece of Bitcoin in China, in the United States, in Russia. There's no other bar on this chart that can say that. All the United States energy is used in the United States. There's not a part of the United States energy that's used in China or in Russia or vice versa. So that's really an unfair comparison. And to that, energy that is consumed on Bitcoin does not only benefit this country of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is, global, permissionless, borderless. It's a payment settlement system, aspirational store value with no citizens, no true leaders. Although people will say Chinese miners are the leaders if they're trying to spread some sort of fear and uncertainty, but there are no true leaders. There are only really thought leaders who, pose ideas, and we don't even know who the guy who created it or people were that created it. But to that, I think it's actually a pretty fun thought experiment for when people bring this up and they try to show me this chart and say, hey, Bitcoin is bad. Let's just pretend that Bitcoin is a country, and that country, the Bitcoin country, has a simple economy, and that economy imports energy, electricity, and exports the transfer, security, and minting of value. So this country has a population of about 1 million people, which are the miners, and they successfully transfer $4 trillion of value a year, which is just the value of all Bitcoin transactions. They secure a digital vault worth $1 trillion US, which is Bitcoin's market value, and it mints $20 billion of new value per year to facilitate transactions via block rewards for 100 million unique parties, which are just the Bitcoin users. And this is, in a way, some sort of like Switzerland light, if you will. Certainly, I doubt that Bloomberg and the like wouldn't immediately decry the nation of Bitcoin as a waste. But to that, Bitcoin, like we said, is not a country. But that doesn't automatically mean that we shouldn't pay attention. This is certainly a ton of energy that's being expended. I mean, it's in the top 30 in the world, right? On that merit alone, we should at least begin to try to understand what Bitcoin's energy consumption means. So what do we actually mean? And I say we, what do people mean when they say, oh, energy consumption is bad? And really what they're talking about is not the consumption itself. It's the means in which the consumed energy is produced, right? And this is around the time actually when a lot of Bitcoiners will get on Twitter and start targeting people and say, oh, if Bitcoin is a waste, then so are Christmas lights, so are appliances that say plugged in even when they're not in use. My coffee maker's probably plugged in right now, and I probably should unplug that. But that becomes like a sort of ideological moral battle that's not going to get us anywhere. And before I dive into some of these numbers, quick shout out to the University of Cambridge and the Center for Alternative Finance. They've put out 3 seminal studies on Bitcoin's energy consumption and use cases across different geographies and citizenships, and it is phenomenal. It's really the backbone for a lot of Bitcoin proponents' arguments against the Bitcoin waste and pollution argument. So quick shout out to them. So back to talking about policing consumption. Policing consumption of electricity seems like a battle really only the most ardent environmentalists are willing to fight. So we should instead focus our efforts on improving our means of energy production. The idea is to use, what they call green or clean energy to minimize greenhouse gas emissions. And the common thing people say is carbon neutral, right? We want to be carbon free. And to do that, we'll need to use renewable energy sources like hydro, solar, wind, right? Now a lot of people argue all day, oh, there's no such thing as greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change, global warming, all that good stuff. We're not here to argue that. We're here to say what people are talking about and what's important. We can argue later about the fact that is false for you guys if you have something to say against that. But what does that mean in the context of Bitcoin? And I've had this chart up for a while, but Bitcoin uses a lot of renewable energy. It's estimated that 39% of Bitcoin miners are powered by renewables, and 76% of miners at least use some renewable energy sources as part of their mix. And that's actually pretty big, right? You see 40% or 39%, you say, whoa, is that a lot? And a lot of countries, the United States is where my lens is because I'm based here, and the United States at best uses 20% renewable energy sources. And the United States is looked at as, the beacon of innovation and, leading the world towards a better future. And yet they are at 20% when Bitcoin's at 39%. So yeah, this is encouraging, but we need to be a little bit careful. Most of this renewable energy, as you can see in the chart below, is hydroelectricity. And although hydroelectricity is great, and overdependence on it can actually be really damaging to local ecology. It just all energy sources have their benefits and their drawbacks. And if you have too much hydro, you could destroy entire fish populations. You can displace a lot of people from homes, which has happened multiple times in China. So we need to find an appropriate mix between all of our potential energy sources, right? You don't want all the coastline of Chios to be only made of windmills. Although it would be awesome, it would also destroy the view, right? Things like that. So as we know, we're thinking about you can see Asia Pacific, Europe, Latin America, Caribbean, North America. Invariably, people start thinking about the big hulking elephant in the room when we think about energy, and that is China. They are the big gorilla, hairy gorilla, big elephant, whatever you want to say, and everyone gets squeamish about it, right? China has 2/3 of Bitcoin miners. Even though I found during my research for this report that China uses a surprisingly high amount of hydroelectricity to power their miners, China as a country has been historically dependent on coal-fired energy. I mean, coal was a fuel that built China into the economic superpower it is today, which is arguably the largest in the world by some measures. And depending on if you're American or Chinese, you'll subscribe to it being the first or second largest. That said, China has hinted at the idea that they're committed to more carbon-friendly energy production. And while I will take almost anything any government says to me with a grain of salt, but especially the Chinese government, the Western world isn't just standing by and saying, okay, well, we'll see if China will clean their act up and they can have all the Bitcoin mining rewards. Investment has revealed itself as of late, as Bitcoin mining operations have sprung up or announced expansion with a focus on North American-based mining. Some miners are even launching mining pools, which is just a collection of miners so that they can pool their power together so they can guarantee more Bitcoin to themselves and flatten out their revenue curve. These mining pools are exclusively powered by clean energy. And there are more broadly, there are ideas that are popping up, such as the Crypto Climate Accord, which is launched in conjunction with a bunch of NGOs and Bitcoin mining companies with the mission to decarbonizing the cryptocurrency industry. And in that lies proof of work mining, such as Bitcoin. In addition, policy makers are cracking down in China and elsewhere. There are many examples of Bitcoin mining operations that were forced to shut down if they didn't clean up their energy mix. Big example is in China and Inner Mongolia, all Bitcoin miners are forced to shut down, which maybe to the economy of the Bitcoin miners there is not so great, but to the world of energy production and cleanliness, that's great. Inner Mongolia is notoriously coal-driven. It's mostly, I don't remember the exact number when I was doing my research, but it was over 80%, I think, which is crazy. And there's another extreme example in the United States, in the Western United States specifically, there was a town in Montana called Missoula, which had a Bitcoin mining operation, and they were forced to shut down because they were not able to use 100% of their energy mix as renewable energy. Those are, again, big extreme examples, and me as a Bitcoiner, I'm certainly not advocating for strict and sweeping policy and government intervention, but that is actually something that could invariably lead to cleaner Bitcoin mining. And the fact that governments are coming in and saying, no, you can do this, you need to do it cleanly though, that actually gives Bitcoin a little bit of legitimacy in the eyes of government. So it's actually an interesting way to think about it. And lastly, I say Chinese mining dominance is declining, and that is true. The University of Cambridge's data suggests that Bitcoin mining dominance in China has declined every quarter since 2019. And that's from the eyes of the decentralized, the people who want decentralized Bitcoin, that's great, but also from in the eyes of moving towards more renewable energy sources, that's also great. So we're kind of, focused on, what kind of energy is being used now, what's the idea from a geopolitical standpoint, blah, 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 policy, all that stuff. I want to talk about a really important thing that people use as a means for saying, hey, Bitcoin is actually really great for the environment. And it's actually one of those arguments that gets thrown around pretty haphazardly and doesn't get defended very well. And I'm going to do my very best in the presentation to do this, but I urge you, if you find this interesting, to read the report, because it is a relatively complex topic. And I'm not trying to say I'm smarter than anyone, but I spent a lot of time trying to understand a way to show this properly. So to that, I'm going to go to how Bitcoin is going to save the world and make everything amazing from a renewable energy perspective. Only sort of kidding, but I think it's really important to understand this Bitcoin as a battery metaphor that a lot of people use. And, one of the most exciting and important characteristics of Bitcoin mining, as many of you know, is that miners only need access to electricity and the internet in order to set up a successful operation. You could go to, the most remote part of a village in the most remote island, say you're in the corner of Ikaria or something, you can set up Bitcoin mining as long as you have some electricity and Wi-Fi. So we say that Bitcoin Bitcoin mining is mobile. A miner can mine Bitcoin in a remote area with access to cheap renewable energy that can't be transported for use elsewhere. In this instance, we say that miners are using stranded energy sources. This could be economically impactful to communities near these stranded energy sources as they are able to monetize their proximity. So given that, that's the mental model that a lot of people use to call Bitcoin a battery. A lot of tech bros on Twitter will say, oh, Bitcoin battery, Bitcoin good. And they kind of leave it at that. And rightfully, people are incredibly confused and they're misled, really. So let's be clear here. If we think of Bitcoin as a battery, like a bateria, it is not actually a battery, right? It is not capable of storing energy itself. What miners are actually doing is taking unused energy and converting in Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is storing that value. So Bitcoin is more aptly acting as a value battery, since it's taking trapped energy and converting it into value. So like Bitcoin doesn't make energy transferable, like you would think a battery, it makes value transferable. And usually that's where, the somewhat deep conversations stop on Twitter, but in my report, I felt that I should take it even further since I had space and I had a captive audience. If you had gotten to that point of my report, I take it a little bit further, and there are two things we need to do to set the stage. Is we need to acknowledge that Bitcoin mining, the profit margins are relatively capped. Bitcoin miner profitability is subject to the whims of the difficulty adjustment, which is just a parameter that tells you how hard it is to mine, and to the price volatility of Bitcoin. All of us know that the price of Bitcoin goes up and down like crazy every single day, like nothing we've ever seen. So the best way to stay consistently profitable as a Bitcoin miner is to control what you're able to control. And the things you can control are your electrical and operational costs. The other thing we need to take into consideration when we're thinking about this is that Bitcoin mining occurs continuously all day. So sorry about that, guys. So Bitcoin mining occurs continuously all day. Due to technology limitations and lack of insight into energy demand, energy companies have to estimate how much they need to produce for their customers. As such, there are periods when there is more energy available than is needed, and the supply of energy outstrips demand. To compensate, companies will vary the price of electricity at different parts of the day. And since Bitcoin miners want to lower their costs to control their controllable there, they want cheap energy. And they're good candidates to use otherwise wasted or low demand off-peak energy. So what a lot of people say with that is that Bitcoin demands cheap energy and it needs cheap energy. So that's a good thing, right? Bitcoin miners can act as a load balancer, which means, you know, taking this excess energy that is not needed and pulling it off the grid to and using it for Bitcoin mining, right? They want this excess cheap electricity, and they can then use that to purchase electricity later whenever there is an energy and supply demand imbalance. So again, I've said this multiple times, but Bitcoin does not store a unit of energy for later use. It stores a unit of value for later use. So in this way, I take in the report, I take the likeness even further, and I call Bitcoin a load balancing value battery. So with all that, which is a very complicated way to say that there is a very big need or an acute need for investment in the energy grids across the world, and my lens is the United States, and we certainly need it in the United States. If energy companies build out a new revenue stream by setting up Bitcoin mining operations, then they will have more available capital to invest into their grid, into infrastructure improvements. And as Bitcoin mining events expands, so could the demand for their off-peak energy and for investment into electrical grids, and also investment into clean energy production practices. So to that, we talk about mobility a little bit more. So Bitcoin is a load balancing value battery. And the first time I saw that was, and I'll provide links to anyone who's interested after the fact. Maybe I'll drop in the Slack channel or I'll send it to Dimitri. But there was a very, very good shareholder letter written by the CEO of CT, which is a Norwegian, the subsidiary of a Norwegian company called Aker. It's phenomenal, definitely worth the read, especially if you're a Bitcoiner. I'll send it around, but his letter was the first time I had read that, and that's the first time this idea clicked to me. So of course, slide into my DMs or send me an email or anything if you have questions about this as you go through my report. But to take that even further, right, we have this mobility, which is a really cool piece of Bitcoin. That mobility also spurs innovation. So for example, there are companies that use natural gas, which is primarily methane, which, if you guys know anything on methane, is a worse version of carbon from a greenhouse gas perspective. And they use that natural gas at oil field sites to mine Bitcoin. So part of the process of extracting oil leads to natural gas emission that needs to be removed in some way. It is usually not economically viable to transport that natural gas somewhere else to be used. And as a result, these gases have been historically burned down into carbon and released into the atmosphere. This is actually not very efficient at all. And the efficiency of it is dependent on what the weather is. You know, I heard someone say, who's in the industry, that they burn off the methane to try to make into carbon. Sometimes they're only 30% efficient. So they're sending off carbon, but they're also sending out just a lot of methane. So there are companies that take advantage of this, and they take modular generator setups to oil fields, which then divert the natural gas and efficiently, they said 99.9%, turn it into carbon. But in turning that into carbon, they make electricity and they mine Bitcoin. So in a long way, the mobility of Bitcoin mining could allow energy producers to become more energy revenue efficient, but it also could reduce their pollution footprint. Lastly, and I know I've been on the slide for a while, but this is probably the crux of all my arguments here. We can kind of think of these, you know, cool and innovative techniques that entrepreneurs are using to, you know, make Bitcoin mining more viable. So a side effect we haven't talked about with all this energy use is the amount of heat that mining operations emit. Bitcoin mining operations have popped up in Iceland, Russia, and other cold climates to curtail the cooling costs associated with mining. And it is currently possible, and it may become feasible at some point, to reduce the price of heating your home by using heat emissions from Bitcoin mining. And while that seems sort of ridiculous, there are actually industry professionals that do that, and it is sort of a novelty now, but it may become part of the game in a later stage. And also, there are reports of miners using heat emissions to warm greenhouses and chicken coops. But there's just so many ideas that can be just incubating in the head of bright entrepreneurs that really want to try something and that can take this latent heat and do something cool with it. So I know I said a lot there, but I get really excited about the fact that Bitcoin mining is completely mobile. It kind of actually plays very much into the ethos of what Bitcoin is, right? Bitcoin is completely borderless and it has no rules without rulers, right? And if you don't like, for example, in China, when they shut down the miners in Inner Mongolia, those miners didn't just go home and hang their head. They went off to other regions, like in the Sichuan region, which is completely hydroelectricity, completely powered by electricity, and they set up their miners there. That's what they did. So that's really cool. And you can, if you just shut down coal fired energy for all Bitcoin miners, they're going to find a cheap renewable energy. That's just how it is, or that's how we hope it will be. So I get really excited about that, which is why I spent a bunch of time on that. Again, I urge you guys to read my report if you have time. It goes into this in detail, and I think it does a better job than I did with my almost incoherent rambling. But the last piece I want to touch on before I open up for questions is this big retort that a lot of people say about Bitcoin. They're saying, is that Bitcoin is a worse version of Visa or any other third-party payment processor. It's actually pretty common. Really, really smart people have cited this. Bill Gates even called Bitcoin the most inefficient payment processor in the history of the world, which is the first time in my life where I said, wow, I know more than Bill Gates about something, which was awesome. So there are viable criticisms of Bitcoin, but calling it inefficient Visa is just flatly wrong, right? The argument goes like this. Third-party processors like Visa spend way less energy than Bitcoin does while facilitating far more transaction volume, right? Visa uses 1/4 of a terawatt hour per year, and Bitcoin uses 125 terawatt hours per year. Visa handles an average of 150 million transactions per day and can actually scale up to handling more than 24,000 transactions per second, which is incredibly fast. In contrast, Bitcoin only can handle 300 to 400,000 per day. So a lot of people know this, but I think it goes without saying, and I need to say it, is that there are two big problems with this argument. The transaction scalability of Bitcoin and the actual energy used by Visa. And I said those backwards, but I'm going to talk about the energy used by Visa first. So the payment rails of Visa are held up by more than just the Visa technology stack. It is difficult to directly allocate how much energy Visa depends on to facilitate transactions, since the currencies it transacts in are government-issued currencies. Visa's success depends on the success of separate systems. Visa's token is not native to its network. There are a ton of people who are far more well-versed than I am that can talk to you all day about the petrodollar and it necessitating the stability of the US dollar. But I'm not going to do that here. But it is certainly the case that the Visa system is predicated on a lot more than just the Visa system itself. Bitcoin, by contrast, transmits native Bitcoin tokens to settle transactions finality, governed by the same rules and protocol. Bitcoin is just more than a payment network, and it's a final settlement layer as well. It's all contained within one network, which is really, really cool. And people don't really understand that when I swipe my credit card at whenever I go get my foot up or something, that doesn't mean that the person has been paid. There is settlement layers in between, and people need to get paid at each point to settle transaction finality. And lastly, this is sort of a big argument that happened a long time ago in Bitcoin about transaction scalability, and we're still having it today, is one transaction does not necessarily equal one payment on the Bitcoin blockchain. And there have been, again, many articles written about this, and there are a lot of companies working on this. What Bitcoin does at the block level is offer final settlement. But there are things like Lightning or Liquid by Blockstream, where the Bitcoin transaction might represent the hundreds, thousands, or millions of related transactions. And just simply counting transactions at the block level of Bitcoin is just unfair and really incomplete, right? The cool thing about Bitcoin is that it is that final settlement layer, and it can settle $10 billion of value just as easily as it can settle $100 billion or $1 trillion of value. It's just wild to think about the possibilities. And while I take a chance to catch my breath, I want to pose one last question before I wrap this up and open up for questions from you guys. Is ask yourself this: how much energy does the current financial system use? There's just a lot of people have said this. My personal Bitcoin hero, Andreas Antonopoulos, the first time I heard talk about this is there's so many things that go into it. You know, Brinks trucks take money from one vault to another vault, and those vaults are guarded by people who drive to work every day. And there are entire skyscrapers in New York City that need to be climate controlled with lights on so that everyone knows that the power of XYZ insurance company is viable over mine, or blah, blah, blah. There's just so much that goes into it that my answer to that question is, I don't know, but it's definitely more than Bitcoin. So I leave you with that. Before I open for questions, remind you of my disclaimer so I won't get fired. This is not financial advice, and these are my opinions, not my employers. Follow me on Twitter if you want. I'll mostly talk about Bitcoin, soccer, and NBA basketball because Giannis is the man. Follow us at Coindesk Data, which is Coindesk Research team. Check out all of our other research reports on coindesk.com/research. We have a lot of things there beyond Bitcoin. I only write about Bitcoin, but I have a colleague who writes about Ethereum. We have things about DeFi. We have things about NFTs if you care about that. Just feel ready to go ahead and peruse if you like. And I also have a bunch of links on the screen. I don't expect any of you guys to be writing them down curiously. I can send them to Dimitri, or we can have it on the Slack channel for further reading. But in the meantime, guys, thank you. I hope my Greek wasn't too bad, and I hope I didn't ramble too much. Thank you.
Thanks, George. That was great. I'll open it up to everyone. So, okay, people can unmute themselves and ask questions to George.
And I'll do my best, guys. I don't know all the answers, but I have some.
Or maybe people will, they're typing into chat as well.
Okay, I see one.
We have one question in YouTube as well. How much a Bitcoin really cost? Probably in terms of energy or something else.
In terms of energy input, so I'm not going to dodge a question here, but that's almost impossible to really determine, right? There are a lot of things that go into that. It's how much does the energy you're using cost, right? You can go to certain areas in China and you can actually get basically free energy directly from a hydroelectric dam. But you know, if you're in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I am, I don't know if you can get anything for cheaper than 7 kilowatt hours per second. I don't know exactly what the price is, but who knows there. And then there's also a big disparity. I say big, there is a disparity between the efficiencies on mining equipment. A lot of people talk about the Antminer being a far more efficient Bitcoin mining rig. If you have that, it's probably, you probably spend less to make more Bitcoin and vice versa. So not trying to dodge a question, but I would pose this: if Bitcoin miners weren't profitable, then they would not be operating. So the cost of making a Bitcoin or mining Bitcoin is certainly less than the current price, which I know goes counter to sort of what Satoshi said at the beginning of it all, saying that, oh, the price of Bitcoin will coalesce to the price of its input cost. Maybe we get there someday, but just right now, I mean, there's so much that's going on that probably won't happen until, you know, it's at 2 million euros a coin, right? So I see a couple questions. Hold on. I see one from Ioannis Nicolaou. The vision of Bitcoin. So the vision of Bitcoin in Satoshi paper included the goal of solving the problem of cutting off the possibility of small casual transactions that the traditional payment systems have. Given the Bitcoin price and transaction cost trends, do you think this goal is feasible in a proof of work blockchain? So I'm not exactly sure if I buy that Satoshi wanted to cut off all small casual transactions. In fact, the white paper is titled as digital cash, right? A peer-to-peer electronic digital cash. If anything, he wanted casual transactions to occur. And there's, again, I mentioned Andreas Antonopoulos during my presentation, but he's writing a very technical book on the Lightning Network, which is, you're right, is not a proof of work blockchain, but it is a layer built on top of a proof of work blockchain, which allows transactions that could actually be millisatoshis, which is smaller than a 100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So do I think it's feasible to continue? I think maybe the question is asking if it's feasible to do small casual transactions. Yes, I think that is feasible. Maybe not right now. Actually, today you probably could have sent a transaction for a penny per sat byte today, or a sat per byte today, which is great. But I think it is feasible, just not in its current state, if that makes sense. There has to be work done in the second layer and the side chains. I hope I answered the question. The correlation for Bitcoin. So someone, Anita asks, thank you, Anita, thank you, Ioannis, for your question. Anita, what about the correlation of the Bitcoin value and energy consumption? And it is, I didn't put the chart, it was actually in the report, but you can see as price goes up, energy consumption is going to go up. And that's viewed in some way as a problem, and it can be viewed as a problem, but there is certainly a correlation between Bitcoin value and energy consumption. As the price of Bitcoin goes up, people are going to want to mine Bitcoin and make money, right? And as more miners enter, there's going to be more energy that's consumed. Now, the opposite is the case. And in theory, when the price goes down, hash rate is also supposed to go down, and more miners are supposed to leave it. The more inefficient miners would leave the market, and energy consumption will go down. But there is certainly, as the price value of Bitcoin goes up, so will the energy consumption. I think the long-term implication of your question is what happens when, Bitcoin is, I'm not saying Bitcoin's going to $1 million each, but what if it does go to $2 million each and it runs a big portion of our financial system? Well, how much energy is that going to use? And we really can't tell because it's not necessarily a linear relationship, right? There at some point will be a tapering off, and it's more of a, we'll get to a point where that's as much energy as we can use, and that's really where it's going to sit around. Hope I answered your question. My father, thank you, Dad, for introducing me to Bitcoin. You're my hero for that. He said, I read somewhere that it takes energy of the sun to solve the last block, which could be a misattribution to what it means to quote unquote solve the last block. I think what he probably means is going from Genesis block to the last block that has a Coinbase transaction in it, i.e. new Bitcoins are issued and we reach the $21 million hard cap, is some level of energy that is equal to the amount that's emitted by the sun. Quite frankly, I have no idea. That I feel like the energy of the sun is a lot, but so is the amount of accumulated energy that is in the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's certainly a lot. I don't know if it's that much, but it's certainly a lot that's going to go into the first 300 or first blocks until the block reward ends. Andrew Kennison asks, what would be the best way to incentivize more miners to use more renewable energy? And the big libertarian / anarcho-capitalist / real cypherpunks are going to probably get mad at me for saying this, but the best way to incentivize more miners to use more renewable energy is policy. People are scared of, I say scared, people, when the government talks, people are going to listen, right? If you ban me from using coal to power my Bitcoin miner, I could do it if I want to, and risk going to jail, or I can go find a cheaper way to, get energy and make it in a way that's renewable. So I truly believe that policy is, if you care about clean Bitcoin mining, then policy is the way to do it. I think naturally Bitcoin miners will coalesce to these remote areas with a lot of abundant renewable energy sources, and it will sort of like solve itself. But if you ban, you can't go in the middle of Beijing and mine Bitcoin there if they ban mining Bitcoin in the middle of Beijing. Now, there are going to be people who mine Bitcoin still in Beijing, but that need not be the case. So my answer is policy. I'm sorry to the libertarians I offended. Isaac, you're asking the question that I hate that people ask, but it's important. It's an important thing, I think. So this actually doesn't really touch on energy consumption, but Isaac asks, what is your opinion on meme coins like Doge and their effect on the public perception of Bitcoin? And this is probably one, if you're friends with me and you're on this call, thank you for coming. If you're on this call, good friends, have heard me not really complain about. I just kind of throw my hands up in the air and say, what the heck? I ascribe to the idea that, value, and this is very Austrian of me, Austrian economics of me, that value is very subjective to the point where I don't even think water necessarily has a value that's objective, right? Yes, we need it to live. Yes, we need clean air. We need shelter, but do we really need to live, right? I mean, you have life insurance companies that put a dollar value on our lives even. So I think the fact that Doge is saying, hey, screw you guys, I'm worth more than GM, I think is a recent one I saw. Hey, I'm worth more than a company that makes actual cars, is a big middle finger to everyone in Wall Street or wherever who thinks that, hey, I understand value so deeply and you guys are dumb and retail's stupid. And it's like, well, look at this Dogecoin that means nothing, who they literally say, hey, our value proposition is meme coin, is worth $70 billion. And you can't do anything about that. So I actually love it because it just shatters the idea of value to me. However, a good argument can be made that it does hurt the public perception of Bitcoin for people who aren't already involved in the industry. It acts as a layer between, literally the bullshit or the dog shit and getting to something that's really, really, really good. I think in a bear market is the best time to learn about Bitcoin, not in a bull market. We are in a cryptocurrency bull market right now. And if I decided to invest in all the dog coins, I'd be very, very wealthy right now. I probably wouldn't be talking to you guys. So yeah.
Great. I think these are all the written questions. Anyone can unmute themselves and ask George.
And if I don't have an answer, I'll dance around and say some stuff.
Then perhaps let me stop the YouTube live broadcast. Perhaps.
Sorry, how about the obvious slide where the countries were ranked according to energy consumption? Where does Greece stand on that slide?
Not that high.
Not that
sorry,
high?
Dad.
Okay.
I'm very sorry.
So disappointed. No, don't worry.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, does it matter which mining pool a miner is picking? So maybe a lot of Antminer customers, they are pointing to Antminer. Does that matter? Are they counted as China?
Yeah, it actually, so this is, if you really want to get into the details of it, the Cambridge report that I referenced dives into it a lot. And it actually is kind of difficult to really tell how much of the information or how much of the hash rate comes from the Antminers. And you're right, Antminer miners are probably going to be pointed towards Antpool, but does that necessarily mean that Antpool is where we should try to focus our energies? I'm not sure. I don't know. Yeah, that's right. Sorry. Not a great answer, but it's a good thing to look into, I think.
All right. Let me stop the live YouTube broadcast. Perhaps some people are shy when they speak to the entire planet. So